Council, we're going live. Thank you, James. I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting of July 31st, 2023 to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lynn Timmers, Councillor and Chair of General Business and Finance Committee. I would like to begin by reading a safety notice. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate council chambers to the nearest exit through the chamber doors and obey all instructions given, and if assistance is required, please see the Deputy Clerk. Once you have evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of Town Hall. Also, please ensure your cell phones are on silent or please turn them off. And lastly, the Town of Council meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. Closed captioning is available on all our videos by selecting the closed captioning button on the bottom right of the video. Roll call. Members of council are in attendance in person and remotely. Councillor Weimer and Councillor Regima will be joining us shortly. We have staff in attendance in person and remotely. Additionally, we have representatives from KPMG attending this evening. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Do members have any amendments to the order of the agenda? And seeing none. We have no statutory public meetings this evening. We are now considering the consent agenda inclusive of Housing Select Committee minutes of March 14th, 2023, Heritage Advisory Committee minutes of May 11th, 2023, Age-Friendly and Active Community Advisory Committee minutes of June 1st, 2023, and Heritage Advisory Committee minutes of June 15th, 2023. Would any member of council like to remove this item from the consent agenda to discuss? I'm seeing no one. I just need to change my glasses. There we go. That's better. There being no, oh, sorry. Okay. I have a motion moved by Councillor Murray that all items listed under the heading of consent agenda for Monday, July 31st, 2023 be adopted as recommended. Housing Select Committee minutes of March 14th, 2023, Heritage Advisory Committee minutes of May 11th, 2023, Age-Friendly and Active Community Advisory Committee minutes of June 1st, 2023, and Heritage Advisory Committee minutes of June 15th, 2023. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. Councillor Regima, may I have your vote, please?
Favor.
Thank you. And I'll close that vote and that motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Clerk. We are now at the general business and finance portion of the agenda. Under delegations, we have none. Under reports, we are now considering a report AD-06-23 regarding proposed 2023-2026 term of council priorities. Our CAO will now provide introductory remarks. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening to members of council and to members of the public that are tuning in this evening. Before you, you do have our updated strategic plan taking us from 2022 to 2026. To this evening, we are hoping to ratify that document. And following that, we will be sharing and communicating with the community our priorities and council's priorities for the future in the next 4 years. As council knows, our priority plan acts as a roadmap regarding council's expectations and what will be accomplished through this term of council. Ultimately, council's priorities guide the investment of resources and corporate initiatives. The new plan will anchor its priorities in 3 key areas that were built on from the previous priority areas. These 3 pillars are welcoming and connected, vibrant and prosperous, and responsible and resilient. And under each of those areas, as you can see from the document attached, we will focus on things like community engagement, inclusivity, governance, community spaces and connectivity, the town's transportation network, economic prosperity and tourism, agricultural excellence, promoting a healthy and safe community, environmental heritage and smart growth stewardship, and last but not least, sustainable financial management. These are a few, and as we roll this out to the community, we will build on each of these. As I said in my opening comments, a strategic plan serves as the backbone of an organization, acting as the touchstone that drives our collective efforts towards achievement. It will guide decision-making and ultimately investment on what matters most to our community. And I look forward to being in front of council as we develop work plans and as this guides our updated strategies over the next several years. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. CAO. I'm now going to open it up if there are any questions or comments from council. I'm not seeing anybody in the queue. Being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Rajima to receive and file report AD-06-23 regarding the proposed 2023-2026 term of council priorities, and that council approve the 2023 to 2026 term of council priorities as outlined in Appendix A of report AD-06-23. Deputy Clerk, if you could please open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. Councillor Rajima? Oh, it just popped up. Thank you. And Councillor Reimer.
Yes.
Thank you. I will close that vote and that motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Clerk. We are now considering a report FN-07-23 regarding 2022 year-end and audited financial statement report. We have Carlos Alvarez and Matthew Chardelli from KPMG in attendance to speak to the report. But first, I will ask that council proceed with a majority vote to extend the speaking time. If we could do that by show of hands.
That's fine, Chair. Thank you. And that carries. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. If you want to come forward, gentlemen.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Your Worship, and members of council. We are pleased to present the audit findings for the fiscal year ended December 31st, 2022. We will use the audit findings report as the main document that we'll walk through. Certainly understanding that that document would have been pre-circulated, Matt and I will focus in on the items that we feel are most significant and material to bring forward to your attention. Where we would like to begin is a few slides in on page 4, just in terms of audit highlights. Effectively, we are complete in terms of the audit process.
Very sorry to interrupt, but our CAO would like to make a few opening comments, and I missed that on the script. So if you wouldn't mind, go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Madam
Apologies.
Chair, and I apologize. You guys got right into it. I did want to introduce members of council. It's been a number of years. We've seen definitely Carlos virtually. Haven't seen these two gentlemen presenting in front of us in person, but Matt and Carlos. And I do often try to provide some opening comments when they come here, and it's really an encapsulation of the conversations that I have with them at the end of the audit process. And so typically, once the audit is complete, I always sit down with our auditors and I don't grill them, but I ask them a few questions, and I often start with, is there anything I should be concerned about? And I think by Carlos's smile, you can see there's nothing that I should be concerned about that they brought to my attention. I think that's a positive sign, but I did make a few notes on some of what you said, and I think it's good context before you dive right into the numbers, which I know are your bread and butter and you get into. But Matt, I think your comments were around tidy, prepared, great package that we put together. You highlighted some of the 2022, the new standards, and some of those new audit standards and what that means. You talked about that this process raises the bar. You also highlighted that we over communicate, definitely in some areas. So that's a good thing, I think, sometimes. Things like pledges that we have, things about government grants, we're very detailed in those particular areas. So I think, to council, it's important that we highlight some of those things because I think it shows the level of depth we have. Carlos, your comments definitely talked about our preparedness. My question around fraud and those things, you answered as I hope you would, saying that there's absolutely nothing, and the results and the findings are very clear. Want to highlight the support from Charlotte and her team. I know you highlighted that as well. Talked about our books and records being in good shape. And oftentimes when you look at tens of thousands of transactions, you talked about inevitably you find one or two things that may be wrong or that maybe, are a transcription error, an error in terms of input. And I think you said here, we don't even have half a dozen little mistakes in there to find. So that's a testament I would suggest to the staff and everyone doing the work here. So those are my just some opening comments I want to provide. Again, I think it's important to just provide a little bit of that context in terms of the conversations we have and the months of work that you do with our finance staff and the rest of our corporate leadership team. So now the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. Okay, Carlos and Matthew, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. And certainly, the comments made by the CEO will touch on some of those comments as we go through the report as well, from our auditor lens. And so in terms of audit highlights, again, on page 4, we are effectively complete. We do have a couple items that we need to complete, which are very customary to where we are at this point in the audit process. I can confirm to council that in terms of how we executed the audit, there were no surprises of any sort. We did the procedures that we originally sought out to complete. We did receive the full cooperation from the management team, and they were very supportive of the audit process. What would be an audit without discussing misstatements? Certainly that's what we're hired to do. Over the course of the audit, we do have one finding to bring forward to your attention, which relates to a cutoff error between 2021 and 2022, and we'll speak to that just in a few slides. In terms of unusual transactions, the only item that would be different from my perspective would be with respect to the library. So there was what I would call restructuring in 2022. So now you own less than 100%, so you proportionately consolidate your percentage of the library. But if you were to compare these financial statements with the prior year, the look and feel of the financial statements would be very similar from 2021. From an accounting policy perspective, in terms of how these financial statements come together, there were no changes in any of the underlying accounting standards. And from an auditing standpoint, there was only one minor change in an auditing standard, no impact on your management team. It was more of a standard that impacted us as practitioners. So from a regulatory standpoint, 2022 was very quiet. There is one exciting new standard that is coming upon us that will be effective for your fiscal 2023 financial year, and we'll speak to that shortly because that is a significant new standard. Moving along to the next slide. One item to note, which I do like to stress with members of council, as part of the audit process, we do ask your management team to sign what I would call a very important letter. These financial statements are your financial statements. These are not financial statements of KPMG. So we have them sign what we call a management representation letter. That letter does a good job in terms of outlining management's responsibilities as it pertains to these financial statements versus the responsibilities of an external auditor. So we will do a trade between that signed letter and our signed unqualified audit opinion. Moving along to slide number 6. The CEO made some comments already with respect to fraud as part of every audit in Canada. We as auditors are always required to respond to 2 specific risks. One is the risk of fraudulent revenue recognition, and the other risk is the risk associated with management override of controls. We respond to those 2 risks in our audit file. I can confirm to council that based on all the results of our procedures, all of the documents that we examined, the results of all of our inquiries and analytics, all of the transactions were above board. So there's nothing on the topic of fraud to bring forward to your attention. Okay. Now we'll dive into just a few areas of what I would call the nuts and bolts of the audit.
Thanks, Carlos. Before we get into the next few slides, which I refer to as the meat and potatoes of the audit, summarizing where we spend our time and what we do, I will echo the comments that the CAO made, complimenting management for their package and preparedness. Absolutely received full cooperation from management and the finance team. And I know that there was some transition on that team this year. So certainly a positive result from our perspective that allowed us to execute the audit as we intended without any meaningful delay. So the slides we have here, as I said, are the meat and potatoes of our audit where we spend our time. What you see on the screen here is tangible capital assets, certainly an area that any municipality or equivalent would find material to their financial statements. This comprises all of your infrastructure, your land, your buildings. Audit procedures in this area involve sampling and vouching to third-party documentation for any material additions during the year and also any material disposals. That work consists of both finished assets and assets still under construction as at the end of the fiscal period. So nothing to bring to your attention based on the results of our procedures there, which is certainly a positive result because it is a very high volume area with respect to the audit of the town. The next slide I'll speak to refers to post-employment benefit liabilities. These are an estimate for accounting purposes representing the present value of the future liabilities that will need to be realized in relation to retirees and those who have worked for the town in the past. As is the case for anybody reporting under the public sector accounting standards, typically management will engage a third-party specialist, in this case an actuary, and provide them with census data for those historical and current employees. Take that data, layer on modeling and assumptions that their expertise can provide in order to produce a report that management then uses to estimate the number you see in your financial statements. Our work over that area is a bit of a deep dive. We dig into the census data provided to that third-party actuary, making sure that the starting point is valid. We also challenge and benchmark several of their assumptions. A very minor finding that you'll see on this slide is that that actuary provided a report several periods ago, which included a projection to 2022. That is a little bit out of the norm. Typically, they would revise each assumption, such as the interest rate or discount rate every year. In this case, those assumptions are still static from the date that report was produced. Based on the results of our test work, that does not create a material difference by any means and is not something that is profiled in more detail in our report. However, we have flagged to management that when they engage their third-party specialist, whether it be that same actuary or another next year, when a full new report is required, to keep that in mind and work with them to ensure that that's considered. So very minor finding there. The next slide I will speak to very quickly. Carlos alluded to the fact that there is a new standard upcoming that takes effect fiscal 2023 related to asset retirement obligations. That is true. So for fiscal 2022, there was no change to the standard or the process management used to account for these items. Carlos will speak to this in a little more detail later, but know that in fiscal 23, that process will become much more involved as that standard is adopted. But 2022 was very much status quo and no meaningful findings based on our work over that area. On page 11 of our findings report, I will speak a little bit to the single audit misstatement that we have identified. That was related to a prior period cutoff error, as Carlos mentioned in the summary. What that means is there were certain expenses that pertained to fiscal 2021 that were not accrued during the year-end close process at that time and have been included in the results of fiscal 2022. This amount was just over $250,000. That is well below the top line materiality for the audit. However, it is above our audit misstatement posting threshold, which is a much lower number. And that is why it is included in our findings report. It is not a corrected misstatement because at the end of fiscal 2022, the net ending position for the town is the same as it would have been either case. So not a significant error that required correction. And at the end of the current fiscal period, the result is the same. Because of that misstatement being identified, we also highlight a control observation. We considered this a one-time isolated error, not something part of a recurring daily process by any means. And as such, we recommend that communication between the different teams within the finance and other departments just keep open around year-end close so that these one-off items can be communicated and considered during the financial statement preparation process. Now, I did speak to this just now. This is the quantification of that single uncorrected audit misstatement. You can see here that our posting threshold is $58,000, which is a very small threshold given the dollar values in your financial statements. And as Carlos mentioned, as much as we try to find more misstatements, certainly only one being included in your findings is a positive result given the size of the town. Now, I did speak to the control observation as well. Rather than go into more detail, I will pass it back to Carlos to speak a couple more words over that upcoming standard change.
And just on the topic of materiality, so the 58,000 is our de minimis threshold. Just as a reminder to council, we set a higher materiality level, approximately $1 million. So as part of the audit process, whenever an auditor has audit differences, they will tally those up and compare it to the $1 million mark. And so as you can see, we are at 249,000, sufficiently below the $1 million figure. So that does not cause me any concern or stress or nervousness for me to sign the unqualified auditor's report. In terms of that new standard, just to give you a sense as to the significance of that new standard, currently you have many assets that you control. As long as those assets are actively used, you do not have to worry about the costs associated with decommissioning or bringing down a building, for example. But the new standard would force you as the town to recognize all costs associated with any requirements to demolish a building, as an example, as part of a mandate. So if you have a building that has asbestos, as an example, and that building has a 40-year life, you don't wait until the 40 years is complete for you to recognize the cost of removing that asbestos. You were actually required to record a liability today, even though that 40-year mark may be well on into the future. So that's what I would call the simplest example. But the town would literally need to go through every single asset and ask those questions. Will you have a liability that you're legally obligated to incur at the end of the useful life of that asset? And that's fundamentally different than the current accounting rules for 2022. So we raise it because this will result in additional time by your management team. They will require sufficient level of resources to get through that process. Ultimately, it's hard to project what would be the outcome of that process, but it is somewhat time consuming in our experience. We have also found with other organizations that have adopted this new standard, some of them have come to the realization that they actually control assets that are not currently recognized in their financial statements. So there are some byproducts as part of this process. Again, too early to tell what this would mean for you as the town, but certainly something to keep in mind. Moving along to the next slide. Actually, we can go forward one more. So just in terms of the appendices, we're not going to go through all of them in detail. The auditor's report that is included in the package is a unqualified report. That means it's a clean audit report. We do call that audit report independent. Independence is very important for us as auditors. What that means is that we've stayed on side in terms of our professional rules. One of the lines in the sand is that we always need to ensure that we never act in the capacity of management. That means we don't make decisions on journal entries, we audit them. We get your package first, we audit your package, we don't complete your package. And so certainly I can confirm to council that we've remained independent throughout the entire audit process, all the way up until today. Okay. One item to note, just in terms of ESG, the letters ESG are not individually new concepts. Certainly what we're seeing from municipalities is, many of them are further along than others in terms of the development of climate action plans. The only thing that I would like to say to council is that, we're here to support you as a second set of eyes as you, continue on the ESG journey. We do have individuals that, review climate action plans to make sure that they are fully inclusive. We are involved with, pay equity reviews and other items as it pertains to ESG. One interesting topic that has a accounting implication. Currently in Canada, there is a body that is working on public sector accounting rules. The hot topic today is whether or not municipalities and other public sector organizations will need to record natural assets on their balance sheet. So the simplest example are trees. So currently there's a task force. They've been involved on this project for over 12 months, and they're discussing whether or not that would be in the best interests of ratepayers and users of financial statements for natural assets to be included in a set of financial statements. This is not something that will be effective for 2023, but it is probably closer than what a lot of people think. And so certainly that's one of the hot topics that the accounting industry is dealing with. So with that, I would say that we've covered the formal topics that certainly we wanted to bring forward to your attention. And so with that, I will pause and back to Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. Thank you both very much. So I'm going to open it up now to council. If you have any questions, and I see Councillor Bernay first in the queue.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So through to the presenters. So good to hear that there's not a lot of concerns and that our CEO got a good report card. I'm just wondering, when I look at one of the slides where it talks, and you spoke to it, Carlos, about the independence and how you maintain that independence all the way through. But I look at one of the slides here and it talks about, applying your expertise and your knowledge and assessing risk to quality. So, coming into this year, I was hearing from a lot of people that I know that are still in business. I myself am retired now, but it's been a big thing all around the world, but especially in Canada, and that's cyber attacks and ransomware. And I do sit on a couple of other boards, and we're taking that very seriously, and we're looking at how we can increase staffing with regards to that. So I'm wondering if that topic was discussed and broached with our staff when you were going through this audit report, in terms of, you expressing your expertise in dealing with other companies that might be going through a cyber attack, and how you're dealing with that.
For you, Madam Chair, certainly I believe it was 2 years ago, which we included cybersecurity as part of an audit plan. The topic of cybersecurity is very significant. I don't want anyone to have the impression that because it is not included in several slides within an audit findings report, that is not important, because it is. We are finding that different organizations are at different stages in terms of where they are. Some municipalities have cyber insurance. some do not. Certainly the cost of cyber insurance has tripled if you look at the past 5 years. What we recommend to organizations is to continue to evolve your cyber defense strategy. I'll use the example of a fire station. A fire station responds to fires, but it's also important for households to have defense mechanisms, whether it's a smoke alarm. And you can never reduce the risk to zero, but organizations should strive to reduce it to an acceptably low level. And I can speak that there are municipalities in Ontario that have been hit with cyber attacks in the last 24 months. Certainly some of them are, well profiled in the press. So again, continue to respond and invest in those strategies. Certainly those that want to infiltrate your systems, continue to change how they do that, and you need to continue to invest in changing your defenses to keep up with it. Certainly, there are a host of organizations that are external to you that can assist on a as needed basis. If you feel that you do not have the support in-house, we are finding that many municipalities do reach out to supplement their teams and also to provide a second set of eyes to ensure that the municipality is going on the right track and is considering all those things that it should. So it's not part of a financial statement audit, but certainly, we welcome the opportunity to have a session for council in terms of what are those top threats. We love lists, so we can share with you the top 10 ways that individuals penetrate systems. How should you respond? And we also help organizations with having the response down to, if there's an incident, how long will it take for council to be assembled? Who is the law firm that will be contacted? Because that could be different from the law firm that you currently use, and have that response down to a T in terms of, here's a response in the next 24 hours. So certainly welcome that opportunity. And I hope that that answered the question.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, for that opportunity to ask that, Chair. And I appreciate your fulsome response. And I realize it's not part of this financial audit, but I wanted to hear, your comments, because this is becoming more and more the norm. And we are hearing in the news that municipalities, not just hospitals, not just large organizations. And, I read something in the Toronto Star recently that said the average ransomware payout, because most companies are just paying it, the average one right now is $540,000 in Canada. So, I mean, these things are happening, and they're happening more and more every day. And these guys are finding out how to get into the system. So I just want to make sure it's on our radar and that we have the expertise. We talk about emergency preparedness all the time. I would consider this emergency preparedness. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Renee. Good question. I have Councillor Russell next. Councillor Russell, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, question first. Is it okay if I ask a question about the staff report that accompanies the audit findings?
Not at this point, Councillor, after presentation, and then we'll discuss the report.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mikulik.
Thank you very much. Through you to the presenters, the auditors, thank you for coming. I think it's great that we have these, and very important to have these audits yearly. It protects our staff and protects ourselves and everyone involved to make sure the numbers are accurate and transparent. With the new items that you mentioned that the government, I'm assuming, has put upon us to fulfill, or now we're obligated to, there's going to be some expense to that. Do you consider that to be additional red tape? And is this something that the government, should we be advocating to, hey, look, you're creating more work for us that might not be necessary? Or do you think it is necessary? Who deems it necessary?
Through you, Madam Chair, it is, so the accounting body in Canada that is tasked with setting the accounting standards issued what they call an exposure draft. That exposure draft was available for comment by municipalities, shareholders, businesses, all organizations in Canada. Those who set the standards solicited all of the feedback, and based on the feedback, they've come to the conclusion that this standard change would be of benefit to the users of the financial statements, and the benefit would exceed the cost of implementing that new accounting standard. So they've certainly looked at the cost versus benefit analysis when they do come up with a new accounting standard. So it's not the government, it's the accounting board that is effectively tasked with setting the accounting rules that has come up with this. And during COVID, they did delay it a year in terms of the implementation date, but at this point, it is effective for 2023, and they've assured us that it's not being delayed a second time.
Okay, to me, it just, the way it was presented, perhaps, it just sounds like additional effort and red tape that may not necessarily have any real benefit to a municipality or to a business for that matter, when you're having to audit or appraise living assets that, like trees, for example. That seems like a lot of work in my mind.
And through you, Madam Chair, I can use different examples. Many municipalities that are really old, that have a lot of old infrastructure assets, whether it's an old gas station or a hockey arena that has old tanks behind the arena. There are some municipalities that do own and control a lot of assets that do have some costs that they know they will have to incur at some point in the future when that asset is no longer in use. So from a ratepayer perspective, this new standard will actually bring to light what are some of those costs that currently are not shown as a liability in your financial statements, but will be a liability in the future. So it's trying to bring that forward onto your financial statements. So in some respect, it's removing those surprises that may happen down the road.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Mikulik. I'm not seeing anyone else in the queue, and our CAO has a couple of closing comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think the only comment that I wanted to make, and I know it's a conversation again that we had, but I think council will recall for probably up until about April 27th of 2022, we're still dealing with COVID and some of the impacts of COVID, either full closures or partial closures as we reopen. So I know that's one of the things we as staff and our auditors spoke to. And I think COVID, and we were talking about this over here to the side as you came in, we think COVID's over with, and I think we're all glad with that. But as we look at closing out 2022, a good part of that year, I would say almost half that year, was impacted by COVID. So those are the only comments that I have, Madam Chair, and staff are open to answer any questions council may have as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. CAO. Before I go to the staff report, I have Mayor Easton in the queue. So Mayor Easton, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have two questions. One has to do with Appendix C. In Appendix C, item number 5, you talk about increased community improvement plan costs. And I wondered if there was a time period that we needed to repay the fund in full as DCs came in. Is there a time limit on that? Is it the next 5 years? Is it the next 10 years?
For you, Madam Chair, just to clarify, Your Worship, is that in the audit findings report, or is that an appendix in a different document?
It's in the staff
Okay.
report. Sorry, I've got them pretty close together. Okay, wait a minute till I see. Oh, the other one is as well. My
That-
apologies.
Not a problem, Mary Stin. So at this point, what I'll do is thank you very much for your presentation. And we're going to move into questions to staff regarding the staff report. And Mary Stin, if you would like to
To
go
start,
ahead with your questions. And then I know Councillor Russell was also had a question for staff, but since you are on the queue right now.
it's very generous of you, Madam Chair. It is related to item number 5. I'll direct it to the CAO and he can redirect as necessary. I just wanted to know if there was a time limit in terms of how soon we had to pay back that fund.
Thank you, Mary Stin. I'm going to turn it over to Charlotte.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, to the mayor. I would say there isn't really a specific time limit. It's more in terms of how we want to manage the cash flows on the development charges, what the projects are that we need to fund. And I would say, you know, we want to put a plan into place, but there isn't really a specific time limit that I know of pertaining to those reductions.
Okay, that's helpful. And item number 34, region flow charges exceeded the budget by $908,000. And these were offset by reduced cost of contracted services. We just have a little bit more explanation about what the contracted services were.
Absolutely, Mary Stin. Charlotte, are we looking to you again here? Yes.
Through you, I'll do my best, and then I may turn to the Director of Public Works. But in reviewing those budget variance reports, sometimes we budget for certain contracted services, for example, in water and sandy sewer, and then it becomes a timing issue. So we might anticipate the time when that work is going to be done, and then perhaps it gets delayed until the following year. So that comment is basically to say that we did have an excess cost there in terms of the region flow charges. Sometimes that can be a result of any variable charges, but we had savings to offset. That's basically what that note is explaining.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte.
I don't know that that really didn't help me very much, but it doesn't sound like there's an issue at hand, because I don't know what the contracted services are, and I don't know how the contracted services relate to the flow charges, because I'm assuming that this has to do with water.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Mary Stin, I'm going to see if there's another staff member that wants to chime in.
Mr. Graham's not here.
Director Graham, I'm sorry, I didn't see you have your. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, to the mayor. Yeah, so a couple examples would be, we had some CSO funding projects with the region, which didn't go forward. They've been deferred into this year. So there was a savings from last year's budget being deferred into this year.
Okay, all right.
Is that helpful?
Well,
helpful, Mary
it's not
Stin?
really what it says there. I wouldn't have been asking the question, but anyway, that's fine. I've got the answer. I have another question.
Okay. Go ahead.
So, Madam Chair, the statement I would make about this financial statement, and this is the 9th year as mayor that I've been part of these budgets, is that there's a real ebb and flow to what's going on in these reports. And because of, and there's a lot of reasons that's happening, COVID notwithstanding. So the question that I have of the CAO and possibly the chief financial officer is, is that observation accurate? And are some of the plans that we are putting in place to make, I think it's the projections mostly around development charges. That was one of the things that I felt was really causing a lot of movement within this year-end financial report in a number of different departments. And so I'm sure everybody's heard me talk before about what I consider it to be important for us to control that. Development charges if we can. Either that or somebody's going to have to start giving us a check up front to deal with money that we don't have for work that we're going to be doing before the work itself is actually done. So what I'd like to know is whether or not my observations are reasonably intact and whether or not we could expect with some of the actions that council is taking around financial sustainability to get a different kind of control. And I'm using those words because I don't want anybody to think that there haven't been controls. The auditors have already told us we have control over our situation. I just want to know whether or not the movement that we're taking, the way we're looking at the future, is going to help us if we're confronted again with unstable years, high inflation, a number of things that are coming at us that we have thought about, but until we experience them, we didn't really see how difficult they could be. So I didn't have a chance to ask this question. If it's unreasonable to ask it without prior consultation, I understand that.
Okay, thank you, Mary Stin. I think our CAO wants to chime in on this.
Sure. So thank you, Madam Mayor, or sorry, thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to the mayor. Absolutely a fair question, Your Worship, and it doesn't matter that you didn't give me a heads up that you were asking the question, because again, I think it's a fair question to ask. Do I think your assumptions and the comments you make are reasonable? Absolutely. Do I think that there are processes in place or things in place that can add an additional level of rigor? I would suggest in the last year and a half alone, when we look at things like reserve thresholds that we put in place, even if we look at the work of the ad hoc committee, when we talk about long-term borrowing and the limits that we want to put in place, I think those are all additional measures that are appropriate measures and add that level of rigor and oversight that I think council wants. And to your point, not to suggest that that isn't currently in place, because it is, but I think council doesn't want any surprises. And oftentimes, I think what we're seeing in a world post-pandemic, and I only highlighted the pandemic, and I know your comment was you don't want to hear about the pandemic or COVID is an issue of the past. I agree with you. But I think when we set up our 2022 budget from 2021, I don't think anyone thought we would have closures up until April 27th of that year. We base assumptions, we base revenue assumptions on what we have in front of us. And I think when you have half your year almost gone and then an opening that is very slow, those aren't things you can plan for. I think we try to do our best. Councillor Brunet and other members of council have highlighted just what's happening in the industry, not just on cybersecurity, but other things that are happening in the industry. We have construction projects coming in. I would suggest to you anywhere between 50, 60 to 100% more than were budgeted a few years ago. We're seeing that in neighboring municipalities. Most recently, the CAOs got together and we were looking at a recreation project in a neighboring municipality that has almost doubled. And what does that mean? And how do we account for it? Development charges, I'm not going to tell you from a development charge perspective that the impacts and the legislative changes aren't going to impact us. I think they are going to impact us. I think the scope of that impact is something that we need to get some further analysis on. I know the province continues to say they're going to make us whole. I've yet to see what make us whole means and how that's going to occur. I think it's advocacy that we need to do around the AMO table in terms of making us whole. Because again, as you look at roads projects, as you look at a report that Andrew's here to talk about in terms of development activity, all those things are coming back, and we're hoping for stability in terms of interest rates and confidence within the housing market. But yeah, I would tell you, those are all things I think we're taking into account. And if there are other things that we can do from a council perspective, or we can give you, I think that confidence or that additional piece of oversight, we will. But at this particular point in time, and I think we've got a lot of those things in place, and kudos to council for setting up some of these committees and wanting to look at these various elements of what we're doing. Again, I think of reserve thresholds. I think of our long-term borrowing. I think of some of the obligations we have around CIPs and even that conversation. So taking a pause, looking at these things are the appropriate measures. I hope we're not faced with a pandemic that shuts us down and limits revenues and the things that were required of this last one. But again, I think this last one showed us we need to be future ready. We need to be future fit. We need to be looking at those things. So I think absolutely a fair question. I wish I had a more precise answer for you, maybe to say, here's what you could do, one or more, two policies. But I would suggest we're working towards a number of those policies. So I don't know if Charlotte has anything she wants to add further.
Charlotte, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Through you, Chair. No, I think that was a very good summary. Yes, we're looking at all of those things. So I think the big recommendation that I have is that we be looking at things holistically and really trying to look at it from all angles, and just trying to make sure that we're planning sufficiently for the future and funding things in a sustainable way.
Okay, thank you very much, Charlotte and our CAO. Mary Easton?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, staff.
So I have Councillor Russell in the queue. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to staff, a similar question to the mayor's first question. So as related to, it's page 3 of 6 in the report accompanying the audit from the staff, there is mention of that unfunded CIP DC reduction of $832,000. I'm just wondering, back in March, the former director of finance had presented as part of the budget process a relative plan. There was a $4.7 million payment requirement for the TIG aspect of the CIPs, and there was also a $4.7 million requirement for the DC charges. The DC charges, there was no plan, where the TIG side, it was going to be paid back over a course of 9 years. My question is this $832,000 part of the $4.7 million that was mentioned by the former director of finance, or is it on top of the $4.7 million that we have to pay back?
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I see our CAO has his mic. No? Okay. I'm looking at Charlotte. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Yes, I believe it is part of the same number. I was just confirming, but I think what he was presenting to you was the total forecast over a period of time, and this was part of it.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure this wasn't a new number that was going to inflate that the 4.7 million. So, and it's the mayor already asked a question whether or not there is a requirement of payment, and it sounds like there isn't. So I'm good with that, and we can discuss it further at the budget. So thank you very much, Madam Chair and staff.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Next I have Councillor Pachariva. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and through you to Ms. Tuninkaitis. So page 3 of 6 of the staff report. So Charlotte, I mean, I and this kind of goes back. So we established the infrastructure special levy, and we had a reserve fund policy A0NFIN001 that kind of took everything and amalgamated it, right? So we had a special infrastructure levy. We had a winter controlled special reserve. So if the swings in 1 year, you got a lot of snow versus it would be self-funding in retrospect. And you know what? I took a lot of pride in helping to build up that reserve. So first question would be, is that where the disposal of land money went into that infrastructure levy?
So through you, Chair, to the councillor, the land sale proceeds were used to offset operating pressures in the year.
Okay. And if I may, so then my follow-up question is, and then we also had an increase in taxes as properties came online. Why wouldn't we use that supplemental increase to fund the capital rate stabilization reserve fund rather than infrastructure? I'm just curious.
Through you, Chair, to the councillor, I would say all of those things are good suggestions. I think there were just portions of the COVID costs and unanticipated expenses that happened during 2022 that didn't afford the ability to then, direct those funds elsewhere. So I think it was more of a necessity because of the closures and all of the costs that happened. But I do think that's a good recommendation for future years that we could definitely take into consideration. I think the winter control reserve fund and to be able to use that to offset would be a good idea. It was established in the policy, but we would have to come up with a method to add funds into that reserve fund so that we could then draw from it. So again, I think that's all something that we need to look at as part of the 2024 budget, really looking at the sufficiency of those reserves, how much are we putting into them, and how can we make sure that they're there for us in the future?
Okay, terrific.
Okay.
And third question, if I may?
Okay, go ahead,
Okay,
Counselor.
and maybe this is a tag team question to the CAO and Ms. Tunin-Kaitis. So going forward with the budget of 2024, and we know our obligations, like with West Lincoln Memorial Hospital, Infrastructure Reserve, like those are getting us a certain number right off the bat before we even look at tax levy increase. So prudent going forward to maybe look at dialing some of those things that we rolled back all into one catch-all back out. So just so, I mean, maybe for council's purview, they're easier to spot. Not saying that there's, yeah, just.
Okay, Charlotte, go ahead.
Yes, through you, Chair, to the counselor. There is, I did notice in the reserve policy, there is authority for the treasurer to subdivide those reserves at, as considered necessary, and that's definitely something we could look at. I mean, I remember being at a conference at one point in time, and they kind of paralleled having reserves that are like 30 screwdrivers in a box versus one of those sort of multi-purpose ones. And I think what Lincoln tried to do was create a multi-purpose, and that's a positive thing. It's not a negative thing, but we can subdivide a little bit and start to track things more separately if that's the desire of council.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Terrific. And hopefully the nuances of COVID are behind us and we can get back on the rails. So with respect to knowing what our revenues and we won't have too many unexpected costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Next we have Counselor Mikulik. Go ahead,
Thank you very
please.
much, Chair. Through you to staff. With regards to the report on page 2, the second paragraph regarding obligatory reserve funds and the balance, the discretionary reserve funds and the balance. If you read it quickly, like it had the obligatory reserve fund had a balance of 5.2 million or so. The discretionary had a balance of 12.2 or so. Based on projects at the year end estimated at 13.7, we're already committed. All those numbers, can I get a better explanation of that paragraph, especially the part where it says, based on capital funding means means that additional funds will need to be transferred to reserve in the future to maintain and replace the town's existing assets. And where's that money going to come from? And
Through you, Chair, to the counselor. So to walk you through those numbers, we have obligatory reserves, which are like development charges, the Canada Community Building Fund, which used to be referred to as gas tax, OSIF, we have parkland dedication cash in lieu. So those reserve funds are restricted by legislation. And so they show up in a specific note as a liability in the financial statements. And then we have discretionary reserve funds, which are the ones like the infrastructure reserve fund, the hospital reserve fund. Those ones have been established by council. They're not governed by specific legislation, but they're things which council has decided to set aside funds for. Essentially, what I'm saying in the report is that most of what's been set aside is spoken for. That's not necessarily a negative thing. It means that we've put money aside and we've planned projects for those things. But it also means that we have to turn our eye to how will we continue to maintain our assets and replace our assets over the course of time, and making sure that the amount that we're transferring in from the tax levy is going to be sufficient year over year in order to fund all those asset replacements. And so this is something I think that most municipalities are looking at. I would say it's the reason why the province brought in the regulations related to asset management planning, to ensure that municipalities are looking at those things and formulating a financial plan. And so basically the report is saying the same thing, that it's just to say that we need to turn our mind to that planning and make sure we're setting enough aside for the future.
Thank you. Appreciate that. That was a great response, Charlotte. I'll be honest with you. Now, the obligatory reserve fund, just a follow up to that question of 5.2 million. What is our amount that we are obliged to have set aside? Is it 4 million? Is it 2 million? Is it 10 million? Like what is that number?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor, there isn't a number. The obligatory reserves means that we've collected funds, we've collected monies, and we have to set those aside and keep them in account. And then we can only use them for the things that the legislation that they relate to have said they could be used for. So for example, development charges, we collect from developers at the time that they pay their building permits or whenever it's applicable, and then we have to hold it. And then when we do projects that are in the development charge background study, then we use that to fund those projects. Similarly, for the Canada Community Building Fund grant, they give us that money, we put it aside, and then we spend it when we have an eligible project that they've approved for those monies. So there's not really a set amount. It depends on how we want to schedule those projects. And a lot of times, you know, it's still within council's purview to approve those projects when they want to. But as the treasurer, I can only apply that funding when we incur eligible costs.
Okay, thank you. So there is no set amount per se.
There really is no set amount, except that I would say we want to be looking at the forecast in the future, looking at what projects we want to do, and make sure we're planning for that so that we have the cash and the funds to do those projects when we want to do them.
Okay, thank you. And if I may, with regards to Appendix A, on page 18, liability for site remediation. We were speaking about this earlier. I'm seeing that we have, last year we set aside, and I'm only looking at the bigger numbers within this report appendix, 2.774 million last year. This year, 3.675. Is there any explanation of that $900 or $1 million difference? What happened one year over the next?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. So that's our liability. And what happens is we look at costs that we anticipate in the future, and this is going to be encompassed by that asset retirement obligation standard. So you're going to see a change next year in the financial statements to comply with that standard. But the basis for that change, there was nothing material that changed in terms of the items that we have a liability for, but you're required to bring it to present value. And so there was a present value change. And then when interest rates change, that also impacts the calculation. So it's a little bit of an accounting exercise there, but essentially there wasn't a significant change to what we have a liability for, but our measurement of it in terms of when we're going to have to pay it out has made the liability change from one year to the next.
Okay.
Thank you. Third question.
I think you were at 3, but I'll allow one quick one.
Well, the one was a follow-up, the first one, but
Okay,
thank you.
go
I
ahead.
appreciate that. Okay, so last question. Page 16, item 3. Regarding the MPEI, the last 3 lines of that, it's page 16 of that appendix. Let me scroll down to it quick. 15. Oh. with regards to MPI, just trying to understand the difference between a dividend and income received. Trying to get a better explanation of that.
Sure. Through
Go
you,
ahead,
Chair,
Director.
to the counselor. Basically, what happens is in our budget, our budget is more on a cash basis. So when we budget for things like investment income and dividends, we look at the amount of dividends we're going to receive. And so from our perspective in our budget, that's the value that we get from a subsidiary. For accounting purposes, under public sector accounting standards, the way that we look at it is that you do what's called an equity pickup, or it's your share of the total income of that subsidiary is an increase to your investment in them. And then when they pay you out dividends, it's actually a reduction of that investment. So it's basically a public sector accounting standard difference from how our budget is done and how the financial statements are presented. And basically the accounting standards view it as, as the value of that company or that subsidiary or that investment goes up, then our portion of that goes up.
Thank you very much. Great job. I thought you did fantastic on those questions. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Okay. I'm not seeing anyone else in the queue. So with that, there be no further discussion. I have a motion moved by Councillor Reimer. Receive and file report FN-07-23 regarding the 2022 year-end and audited financial statement report. Approve the 2022 audited consolidated financial statements as presented in Appendix A. Authorize the treasurer to transfer a sufficient balance from the Infrastructure Reserve Fund to the Tax Rate Stabilization Reserve Fund to bring the balance to nil. And authorize the treasurer to transfer $30,000 from the Infrastructure Reserve Fund in order to be compliant with the Asset Retirement Obligations ARO standard under the Public Sector Accounting Board, PSAB, Section PS 3280 Municipal Asset Retirement Obligations, as referenced in Appendix B, and that the 2022 Annual Treasurer's Statement of Reserve Funds for Development Charges be made available to the public and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing upon request. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. Thank you. I'll close that vote and that motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. And there being no additional reports to consider for the General Business and Finance Committee agenda, we have now concluded the General Business and Finance Committee agenda and will rotate to allow Councillor and Chair and Deputy Mayor Tony Bernay assume the chair at this time for the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda.
So we are now reaching the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda. 8.1, we have no delegations this evening. 8.2, reports. We will now consider report PW-04-23, the electric vehicle chargers pilot project update. Do members of council have any questions? Counselor Timmers, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Brunei. Sorry, I'm not signed in at this point, but I did have a question. And I think this may have been answered before, but just through to staff. With these electric charging equipment, are they able to be moved to a different location? And I'm asking that question just for future, if we need to move them to a different location. So, thank you. I'm not sure who would want to answer.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Counselor. I think we have Michael in attendance this evening. So Michael, I'm going to swing that over to you to give you an opportunity to answer the counselor's question.
Yeah, through you, Chair. So the chargers can be moved. The physical charging station can be moved. But whatever location we move them to, we would have to do electrical improvements. So depending on the location, you might have to upgrade a transformer box and do some underground electrical work to basically put the base for the station. But the physical station itself can be moved. But through the program, we're essentially building the framework that we could either decide to, if we were moving and wanted to sell the unit and install a new unit, we could do that also. It just depends on the situation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
You, Counselor. Counselor Rinchima.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering, have we looked into the possibility of purchasing or using solar powered electrical vehicle charging stations?
Michael, would you like to tackle that one?
Yes, I can answer that one too. So through you, Chair, we did look at the solar panel option. At this time, we didn't feel comfortable committing to that. It would be an additional capital expense to install the solar panels themselves, and you'd also need a large battery to operate it. And with that, it would be connected to the electrical grid just the same in case we didn't have enough power from the battery to charge the vehicles when they come. So it's something we might consider in the future if we have heavy use at a certain location. It might be a business case that we can look at to offset the user fees. But at this time, we don't want to risk that without full knowledge of how often these chargers are going to be used. And we don't want to drive up the user cost of the station.
Okay, thank you. I understand that. I have another question, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. Proceed.
Thank you. On the very last page of the report, it states in the very last paragraph, overnight parking is prohibited between the hours of 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. according to the bylaw. However, residents may apply for an overnight parking permit. I'm trying to picture how that would work with an electric vehicle charging station. I think $2.50 an hour, that would be about $20 overnight. So I guess I'm trying to figure out how if a lot of people would take advantage of that opportunity. And if there's anybody here that can tell me how much an overnight parking permit costs.
Walter, did you want to try that one on?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair, to the counselor. Currently, right now, my understanding is that we have a bylaw in place that prohibits overnight parking in parking lots to make sure, they're clear from snow removal when we're doing operations. That's the current bylaw that's in place right now. So at this point, we're not planning to change that bylaw. We'll be waiting to see if people will be applying for a permit. We haven't actually engaged with our community services department to talk about what that looks like or what that fee would be, if there would be a fee. So that's something that we will take back as staff and try and get a response back to you exactly what it would be and what the cost would be.
Okay, so it seems like an appealing thing that you want to park your car, plug it in and forget about it over the night. You get up in the morning and it's charged, right? Somebody in the neighborhood might want to do that. So the good thing is there that the option would be there for them. The bad thing, I guess, is like you said, the spot would be taken up overnight if there's snow clearing required. In, for example, the Rotary Park, it'd be 4 spots. That would be, I mean, actually, we're looking at taking up 4 spots, for example, in Rotary Park on a permanent basis because nobody else can park there. So that's a consideration. These are all things we have to consider, but I'm looking forward to hearing about how much it would cost to park there overnight.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. But through you, Walter, and to Director Graham, it's my understanding that, we had a steering committee, and I understand that Mr. Barkway, on behalf of enforcement, was part of that steering committee. So I'm sure along the way, we've had consultation and we've had input, and so you'll touch base with him and come back to the counselor's question. Is that correct?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair, we will.
Okay, great. Thank you. All good, Counselor? Counselor Patriva, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Bernay. So looking, and I mean, again, it's burned into my head. So from Mr. Kirkopoulos, we don't have an expense issue, we have a revenue issue. So wondering why we went with the model that we went with. So it talks about, so what we're doing right now is we're covering the cost of installation and we're covering the cost of the third-party monitoring. But in the report, it says we're going to implement a comprehensive communication campaign. So where's that jing going to come from? And then again, knowing the issue we had at budget this year with some of our climate adaptation items, extra trees, extra rain barrels, would it not have made financial sense to add a little bit more to these EV charging stations? So then in turn, we would have money available to fund some of the other climatic action issues or costs that we have within the town. So
Thank you, Counselor. Michael, I'm going to give you an opportunity to see if you want to discuss that one.
Yes, through you, Chair. So the original intent with the finances is that we would have the program be cost neutral. So essentially we just broke out what the costs of the chargers themselves would be. So the life cycle costs. So we put away money for the end of the life cycle of the charger and then be able to continue the program ongoing. There's a cost of the actual electricity going into the cars that we would be recouping through the fees. And then the cost to maintain them, keep them running, keep the payment system running. So for this project, we've kind of just been focusing on that in kind of a capsule, I guess, so that the fees balance out the cost for it. But that's an interesting point to look at it more on a green initiative scale together instead of just by itself. So it is something that we can look at in the future, and I think we're going to be evaluating the finance for this program as we go forward in years.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Michael. Just further to Councillor Patriva's, question, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but, Councillor Mikulak and I had an opportunity to meet with you and Director Graham and Walter, and there was discussion about some sponsorships, opportunities like that. Is that something you want to discuss now, or is that premature? Michael?
Yes, through the chair. Yeah, I can add on to that. So that's another program that we're going to be looking into or advertising after this meeting. So we're going to provide the opportunity for local businesses to sponsor chargers. So they would essentially cover the costs of the user fees, and we would be able to offer the chargers for free to the public. And we're hoping that would drive more usership of the programs.
Thank you, Michael. Councillor Patriva, did you want to have?
Through you, Chair Bernay. So I highlighted that. So again, the initial fee of $300 says it will cover the sign installation costs. right? So then you're going to provide that for free. Again, I think there's an opportunity there to generate some additional income to fund some of our climate initiatives going forward. And we can review this after, say, a year. So I would ask that a report come back after the first year, detailing the costs and the revenues, and then let's explore that. But it's a good starting point, and I appreciate that. And but look forward to trying to get as much revenue off this as we can to fund the other projects. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think our CEO would like to make a few comments. Mr. Kirkopoulos.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. Councillor, I think your last point kind of what went where I was hoping to go. It's that balance between environmental stewardship at the beginning with revenue generation. And I think as we see more electric vehicles become part of the mainstream and become part of the market, I think looking at how we charge, what we charge, and how it becomes more of a revenue generator, something we'll absolutely, I think, consider. Right now, still in the early stages, but definitely I think we're going to want to report on a regular basis back to council.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. I'm not seeing any other hands right now. But I just wanted to give Walter an opportunity. I know, Walter, this was, your initial report when it came to council initially. You've heard the conversation. Did you have anything that you wanted to just final comments before we go to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's a really, it's a great initiative that council has invested in here. Electric vehicle chargers and other green initiatives are important to this community and other communities in Ontario and across the world. So excited to be a part of it. Just want to thank Michael for all of his hard work. And I think also to acknowledge Niagara Peninsula Energy. They've worked with us on this project and helped subsidize some of the costs towards outfitting these parking lots so that we can connect the chargers to it. So it's been a great team project, also to the rest of the departments within the corporation who have all had a part in what we're trying to do here. So it's exciting for us.
Thank you, Walter. I appreciate those comments. Councillor Michalak, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair Brunet, through you to staff. As Councillor Brunet mentioned earlier, we did have a conversation. It was a pretty, as I mentioned to staff, I wasn't for this, and it's just because of the sector. I was in the gas station business in my prior lifetime. So it's not that, it's just, I look at it from a cost perspective. And, but, we, as a council, I live in a democratic society, and we did, as a council, move forward with this. So I want to see this succeed as best as possible. So yeah, we do have to, I believe, make this investment, carrying cost or operations cost to protect our assets that we're purchasing. They're $300,000 worth of equipment, and we have to maintain and take care of them so that they are functioning. That being said, we, to council, to Councillor Patrick Rivas, we, Councillor Brunet and I, we both asked some pretty pointed questions, to ensure that this was sustainable, viable, and a benefit to the taxpayer. And I felt alleviated, after our just about 2-hour meeting. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. There being no further discussions, I have a motion moved by Councillor Murray to receive and file PW-04-23 regarding electric vehicle chargers, pilot project update, and that staff be directed to amend Schedule A of the fees and charges bylaw 2023-01 to include the $2.50 hourly rate associated with electric vehicle charging, and that council support the operational and maintenance fees associated with the EV charges as outlined in this report. And now I will now ask our deputy clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. And I will close that vote, and that motion carries. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk. There being no additional reports to consider for the Community Services and Public Works agenda. We have now concluded the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda. We will now rotate and allow Councillor and Chair JD Pachariva to assume the chair at this time for the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we are into the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda for tonight. We have no delegations, reports. We will now consider report PD 32-23 submitted by our Chief Building Official, Mr. Andrew Greenaway. The building activity report. Do members of committee have any questions? I see none. Council Brunet, you've taken the role of Councillor Mikula coming in under the wire, but please regale us, and Mr. Greenaway came all the way back, so ask him something.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a question specifically to the report, but I can't let Mr. Greenaway go without feeling he participated in tonight's activities.
He was ready to go.
So through you, Chair, to the CBO. I'm just wondering, we've come out of COVID. I don't know what your expectations were going into 2023, but there's definitely been, some things that have happened, interest rates. A developer at the corner of Ontario Street that we thought was going to move forward has now gone in a different direction. Is there anything in terms of how you entered this year compared to where we are now at the, end of the, as we're entering the fourth quarter, that concerns you in terms of cash flow from a CBO perspective? Or is there anything that's keeping you up at night?
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Brunet. No, there's not. We have a reserve fund. I believe our reserve fund, so if we don't bring in any permit fees tomorrow, I think we're good for 2.5 years, approximately. So the last couple of years have been record years. Last year's numbers, 2022, and this year's numbers are almost back to normal. When we were doing record years, we never increased staff. So I'm sleeping good at night. I don't have any issues with these numbers that are coming in. I did just want to give council or committee here notice that the report June, so the last page, 159 of 159, the 2022 June numbers are 2021. So if you look and you see the value at the end of 2022 is 87 million, that's incorrect. It's really the number above at 39 million. And the end of June this year, we're at 38. So we're approximately the same as last year's numbers. I still believe I was here in March and I said, I think we're going to be higher than 2022. I still believe that with what's coming down the pipe. There is 4 miscellaneous permits that were issued in the first half of this year. 2 of them were for fire alarm panels. One was change of use of the restaurant at Dominic's Barbershop. It was a change of use permit. And the last miscellaneous permit was a retaining wall. If you were at Prudhom's, the new Tim Hortons, and you're at the drive-through, on the right side of the drive-through, there's a foundation installed. And that's going to be the wall of the parking garage for the 6-story multi-use building. So instead of them excavating for that building when the drive-through's in use and they'll have to shore it up, it's cheaper for them just to put the wall in now. So that 4th miscellaneous permit was just for that foundation wall.
Thank you very much, Chair Pachariva.
You are welcome, Councillor Brunet. Councillor Russell.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Through you, similar to Councilor Brunei, without our CBO getting out his crystal ball, I'm just wondering if he can give some commentary on what we can expect ahead, because I know that during the budget process, we did talk about a number of projects that were in the pipeline. Some of those have since dropped off. I'm just wondering if you can give any comment on some of the bigger ones that have been approved. I'm thinking Utopia 2, a couple of those condo developments that were planned for King Street near the No Frills Plaza. Just wondering, I know DeSantis is up for sale, but I'm wondering if you can give some insight into where those might stand and if we can expect them in the next half of the year or sometime early next year. And then at the end of that, through you, Mr. Chair, just again, a little bit more insight into Prudhome's and how things are progressing there from his standpoint.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Russell. Utopia West, my understanding and talking with the developer is that they're going to market in August and September to try to get pre-sales. Once they do that, they'll determine their start date. But when I'm dealing with them, I was in talks with them last week. They're still anticipating going this year, November, December, based on August, September sales. So if they do good with sales, then they'll be proceeding. They don't have their permit in hand, but it's ready to go, and they're still contacting me wanting their permit. So it sounds like they'll be good. I believe I don't think we have a planner in here, but I believe the hotel behind Esso is going wanting to apply for their permit, get that in motion. I haven't heard anything with Prudhome's other than them wanting this retaining wall to get installed. And I don't know about the condos on King Street near the No Frills Plaza. I haven't heard or received any applications for that yet.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. CBO.
Thank you, Councilor Russell. Mr. CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a few comments. One, I think just to highlight the strong non-residential showing that we're seeing in some of our numbers. On the industrial side, definitely with the winery side. And I think it's always good when we see numbers that are not just residential based, but take into account those other sectors. And of course, kudos. I continue to hear from other municipalities, elected officials and staff, but the rock star we have in our CBO here. So I didn't want to leave him, or I didn't want to let him leave without me saying that. He is incredibly modest. Him and his team work incredibly hard as well. And he was right. When we were having record high numbers, we didn't see staff increases. And so I know Andrew does sleep well at night, especially when I'm not bothering. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. And again, Mr. Greenaway. Oh, Councilor Brunei.
So through you, Chair, just a follow-up question. Mr. Greenaway mentioned about Utopia, and I know we've had discussions about expectations on Utopia, and I believe you mentioned, possibly some geothermal work that would be taking place, before the frost goes in the ground. So through you, Chair, I'm wondering if our finance director could just give us some clarity on when DC charges are actually triggered. Like, does it have to be like a permit such as that, or does it have to be like a building permit for a foundation? So in other words, I guess my question is, they might not start permits this year, but they might do, 8 or 10 weeks of geothermal work. Does DC charges get triggered the moment something starts on the project?
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Brunei, it's when the foundation permit's issued. So site servicing, geothermal, that works doesn't trigger the DCs to be collected, but it's when the building starts, the structure itself. So if the foundation's permit before the outright permit's issued, that's the trigger to collect DCs as foundation.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And again, I just want to thank Andrew for all the work that he does. I mean, you give him a shout or you shoot him an email, and within record time he's back to you and solves problems. And I just, going forward too, Mr. Greenway, I mean, you took members of council on a tour of the condos on King and Bench and Utopia, so we could actually see you know, what they actually look like as compared to a flat drawing. And I would ask that if you can do that going forward with any new things, I mean, it's quite eye-opening to actually see, you know, what we've approved on paper come from the ground up. So, I mean, I appreciated that. And I think a lot of my colleagues did as well. So looking forward to that if you can facilitate that. Okay, excellent. Thank you. So we now we'll consider report PD 32-23, building activity report, to receive and file report PD 32-23 regarding the building activity report for January 2023. I have a motion moved by Councillor Murray. I will now ask our deputy clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. And that motion carries. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Devan. We will now consider item 10.1, motion to consider confidential items. Before I read the motion and we move into closed session, I would like to explain what will happen for those watching this meeting online tonight. First, there will be a closed session statement that the deputy clerk will go through for staff that will be attending the closed session remotely. Once that is completed, we will move on with the motion to move into closed session. The deputy clerk will be turning off the live webcast during the closed portion of tonight's meeting. Once we have completed the closed portion of the meeting, we'll resume with the live webcast and carry on with the public portion of the meeting, and we will read the motions in public session. I will now ask our deputy clerk to conduct a closed session statement for those attending the closed session remotely.
Thank you, Chair. All members are reminded that any discussion in closed session are to remain confidential as per our procedural bylaw and our code of conduct for the Council of the Town of Lincoln. Before we begin, I need each member that is attending electronically to confirm the following: that you understand that matters are to remain confidential, and confirm no one else is present with you, and confirm no one else can hear this closed session, and confirm that you are not using any electronic devices other than your tablet, computer, telephone for video conferencing, and confirm that you are not recording this portion of the meeting. If you acknowledge all of the above, please reply with "I understand" and confirm to all of the statements as I read your name aloud. Councillor Russell?
I understand and confirm to all of the statements.
Thank you. Director of Legislative Services, Town Clerk Julie Kirkloth.
I understand and confirm to all of the statements.
Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Devan. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Timmers. Under Section 239 of the Municipal Act, notice is hereby given that council adjourned a closed session in order to address item 10.1 as follows. Pursuant to Section 239(2)(1), financial information supplied in confidence to the municipality. Well, that should be 2I. Financial information supplied in confidence to the municipality, and Section 2J, financial information that belongs to the municipality and has monetary value or potential monetary value as it pertains to Niagara Peninsula Energy, Inc., NPEI. I will now ask our deputy clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. Councillor Regima and Councillor Bernay, just looking for your vote. I'll close that vote and that motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk. We will now proceed with the technical requirements to move into closed session. Okay. So I have a motion moved by Counselor Russell that committee resume in open session. I will now ask our deputy clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now open. And that motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Clerk. I now have a motion moved by Counselor Brunet. The council receive and file the confidential updates as it relates to item 10.1 pursuant to section 239(2)(I), financial information supplied in confidence to the municipality, and section 2J, financial information that belongs to the municipality and has monetary value or potential monetary value as it pertains to Niagara Peninsula Energy, Inc., NPEI. I will now ask our deputy clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. And I'll close the vote, and that motion carries. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Devan. Do we have any committee remarks? Or we're pretty much remarked out as we've had a fulsome discussion tonight. So there being no further business, I call the meeting adjourned 8:35. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Good night, everybody.